Attention! If you, or a loved one, has ever been baited into playing an Inquisitor build containing Instruments of Zeal or Fanaticism, you may be entitled to non-financial compensation. Be warned, exposure to Fanaticism in Path of Building may result in inflated DPS numbers and a rise in cortisol levels when actually playing Path of Exile. The way Fanaticism works is that you gain a gigantic buff to your cast speed, area, and mana costs upon reaching 4 Fanatic charges. You gain a Fanatic charge each time you attack with a 1-second cooldown. Once you reach 4 Fanatic stacks, the stacks are consumed and you get that juicy 4-second buff. Essentially, you need to weave in your attack skill once per second while still casting spells on the other time. Well, that sounds like a pain. Why would we torture ourselves with this? I mean, 2 buttons? Well, it's pretty obvious, the pursuit of DPS. Look, 75 more cast speed is absurd. Even if it was an additive increased cast speed, it would still be pretty solid. Looking purely at the boost in cast speed, Fanaticism can turn a mediocre spellcaster into kind of a damage powerhouse. On paper, that is. As if that wasn't already enough, 75% increased area actually impacts our mapping and bossing significantly by making our hitboxes kind of absurd. We even get a cost reduction buff, allowing it to quench the mana costs of even the thirstiest of builds. So yeah, GGG has actually put quite a lot of thought into addressing potential issues when they made Fanaticism. Sadly, they haven't addressed everything. Look, polishing a turd isn't going to change its nature. There's no way around it. Fanaticism requires attacking and self-casting. It's not a chill, relaxed playstyle, and even if you're okay playing piano on your keyboard, it's still difficult to scale both attacks and spells, which means most builds focus purely on scaling up the spell portion, and the attack is more of an afterthought. It's actually even worse than an afterthought, because it turns your attack into an obstacle that blocks you from reaching
DPS Nirvana.
In fact, it even cuts into your DPS because you're locked into this rigid regimen where you need to attack on the Fanatic charge cooldown, otherwise you get punished by losing your cast speed. Additionally, the Instruments of Zeal notable is locked behind the Instruments of Virtue notable, which is a problem since not every Fanatic build cares about Battle Mage. So we end up spending 4 entire Ascendancy points that could have gone towards getting Inquisitor regen or ignoring resists or literally anything else. On a related note, I'm not sure if this is against TOS, but it should be possible to create an auto hotkey script that intercepts a button press and kinda decides whether it was an attack or a spell. Technically speaking, this doesn't break the 1 server action per button press rule, but it does somehow feel a little unethical, so do with that what you will. Let's shift gears and talk philosophy. GGG's design philosophy for Fanaticism seems to be a true hybrid attacker-caster archetype that self-casts both attacks and spells. Kind of like how your family expects you to move out of the house, further your career, and start a family all at the same time.
In this economy?
Right, but this is pure guesswork, but I feel like Fanaticism, Instruments of Zeal is GGG attempting to dip their toes into the unknown waters of PoE 2 game design. And you know what? I kind of respect it. I respect the bravery, the courage, the gallantry that it took to design and implement an archetype that marries together both attacking and casting. And while Fanaticism has my respect for being so unique, it does not, however, have my respects. Truthfully, in the modern PoE meta, there's no good use case for it. We have so many alternatives that can deal just as much damage, if not more, and even more alternatives that clear maps a lot faster. Fanaticism is a novelty. You play it for the sake of wanting to, and honestly, don't let anyone else convince you otherwise. Unless they're an orthopedic doctor. But RSI be damned, let's take a look at some theory. There are 2 main schools of thought. The first uses combo skills and spell triggers to simply and elegantly put our GGG mandated attack to good use. This sets up a clear-cut formula for this archetype to follow. When deciding what spells to use, some combo spells such as Frostbolt Ice Nova stand out because they don't care about scaling the first spell's damage, and that lets us support it with Spellslinger to combine our attack and initial spell cast together. We can then self-cast our next spell for that sweet, sweet cast speed and area. I'd say the people who make and play these builds are probably upstanding citizens who follow the rules and are overall positive influences on society. They like doing things the proper way. They might also have OCD. Now, the second school of thought. If you ever come across them in a dark, secluded alleyway, run. If you can't run, you'll have a better chance praying than reasoning with them. They don't care. The word unhinged doesn't even begin to describe their thoughts and actions. You see, these people aren't bound by archaic concepts such as uptime and synergies. Instead of attacking precisely every second like a normal person and, casting spells in the meantime, just as GGG intended, these deranged maniacs simply use an attack as their movement skill to stack charges, and they'll just cast their spells whenever, regardless of Fanatic uptime. To these people, the word methodology has 7 letters too many. Joking aside, it's perfectly viable to miss out on having flawless Fanatic uptime, as long as you have enough non-Fanatic cast speed and damage to feel good without it.
But I'm nothing without
Fanaticism.
If you're nothing without
Fanaticism.
then you shouldn't have it.
These builds are kind of out of scope for this video, since they're literally generic Inquisitor spellcasters that just happen to use Fanaticism. They can function perfectly fine though, so don't write them off. Let's start vanilla with our sample builds. Frostbolt Ice Nova. Probably top 3 well-known combo skills due to its age and effectiveness. It's also probably the best iteration of Fanaticism. You spellsling Frostbolt, self-cast Ice Nova on top of that Frostbolt, and this clearly outlines the classic formula of use attack to trigger spell A, self-cast spell B, which interacts with A. In our case, like spell casting Ice Nova on top of a Frostbolt, it causes it to originate from the Frostbolt. Also, if you don't know, Ice Nova will echo any spell repeats, so pretty much everything just synergizes well together here, and the combo feels tight because you're using Frostbolt every second, and it just all makes sense. This was a pretty tried and true build in the past, and I'm very certain you can find success with it in the present. Before we continue down the infinite staircase of degeneracy, I need you to sign this contract. You see, I haven't tested the next builds extensively, and some of them are only here to provide examples of alternative tech. Don't go making these builds your league starter without practicing them first. I'm really not making any concrete meta-shaking claims in this video, I just really want to share some ideas that I believe have potential. Now that that's done, let's see a non-Spellslinger variation. You see, Spellslinger locks us into using wands, and if you know the history of Frostbolt Ice Nova, Pledge of Hands used to be the best in slot weapon due to the greater spell echo, which gave us 2 additional repeats, bringing our total to 4 with normal spell echo. Enter Battle Mage's Cry. It lets us trigger a spell when we hit an enemy with a melee attack. And, Pledge of Hands is a melee weapon. With this setup, we can get the best of both worlds by combining Fanaticism and Pledge of Hands. Wow, that's too good to be true. Yeah, it is. So here's the catch. We actually need to hit a melee attack, which means we have to be in melee range, and while Frostblades, which is what I'm using here, has plus 21 added weapon range, it's not exactly amazing. But it gets even worse than that. Pledge of Hands is a base 1.2 attack speed. Remember, we need to attack once per second to keep Fanaticism up. Yeah, that's an issue. Like, you might be able to hit absurd POB numbers with this combo, but that 0.8 base attack time from Pledge of Hands is going to kill any actual in-game DPS you'll have. You can band-aid fix it with support gems that increase attack speed, but it still cuts into our damage significantly. The reason why I'm mentioning this is to give an example that doesn't use Spellslinger. All Fanaticism builds have this downside, so keep that in mind. It's just that Pledge of Hands has this problem a lot worse because wands have a very good attack speed. Maybe one day they'll buff a part of this build into viability, but yeah, don't limit your theory crafting to just Spellslinger. There are alternatives. They just all kind of suck. Speaking of alternatives, let's move on from Frostbolt Ice Nova. What other skills could we use and abuse with Fanaticism? Lightning Conduit. Think about it, it needs to combo with a shock target, and Orbistorms is already great at doing the shocking part. If we attach Orbistorms to Spellslinger and scale our shock effect so that it actually shocks, we can capitalize on our Fanatic cast speed to spam Lightning Conduit absurdly fast. Actually, this one is passable, but it suffers the same issue as other Lightning Conduit Orbistorms builds. It's extremely melee. It also doesn't help that the Fanatic AoB buff doesn't apply on triggered spells such as our Orbistorms. Also, we're going to have some issues getting good shock values from Orbistorms since we can't 6-link it because that'd take like all of our mana. And, speaking of mana, Spellslinger cuts into our mana, which means it might cut into our defenses, such as determination and stuff. And that's compounded with the fact that we're pretty much melee, which makes it not an impossible problem to solve, but it's still more work than I'd like to do. Okay, so this next one's gonna be a little wild. Dark Pact. Yeah, it's kind of weird, since Inquisitor is supposed to be in an elemental-based ascendancy. But look, we can sling the skeletons and self-cast Dark Pact. We scale our damage through many avenues. Inquisitor crit nodes, Fanaticism's cast speed, skeleton HP, chains, generic minion damage, and bonuses to minion skill gems. We can even use the Valkyras unique gloves to give our skeletons +5 skill gem levels for even more Dark Pact damage. For defense, we have Inquisitor's regen and any other defensive layers we choose to get. Now, as always, there are issues. There's something that doesn't quite add up. You see, our ascendancy points, we spend 4 points getting Fanaticism, another 4 to get regen, and what's this, another 2 points to get the attribute stacking crit node? Yeah, that's 10 points. The solution is easy though. We use Forbidden Jewels to grab Fanaticism. This brings our total down to 6 points, plus the jewels, which actually means we can spec into Augury of Penitence for additional elemental defense. Crisis averted, I guess. I do actually think this could be a really good build, but frankly I can't be asked to buy the jewels to try it out properly. It's definitely weird to see Inquisitor go on hit chaos instead of the classic elemental stuff, but I do think there's a lot of potential here, so if you want to take the idea and run with it, go ahead. If the upcoming PoE events are potentially good, I might try running this build. So that's it for sample builds. There are plenty of things I didn't cover, such as Asenath's Chant, Hydrosphere, and other Templar ascendancies, but I digress. For Fanaticism's final, definite, non-arbitrary score, I rate Fanaticism a me out of 10. You see, I view Fanaticism the same way my parents regard me. A waste of potential. Instead of being a viable mechanic and making the world a better place, Fanaticism spends its time locked up in its room, playing video games, watching VTubers, and making YouTube videos. A genuine disappointment. In all seriousness, I don't see Fanaticism becoming anything beyond a novelty, unless it gets buffed, or the entire community decides to undergo a paradigm shift to play cooler builds. But yeah, that's it for the video. Stay tuned for the next one. Thanks for watching, everyone.